Today our case brings us to Palmerstown in Dublin and back to 1973. This is not just one case but many that surrounds the main case. It is not for the faint-hearted, and so I will say viewers' discretion is advised. It is a complicated case, but I will do my best to make everything as clear as possible. Most of the information on this case was due to a book by David Malone, The Boy in the Attic, as this case did not get the media attention it deserved at that time. Palmerstown is a lot different today in comparison to what it was back in the early 70s. Today it is a built-up western suburb of Dublin, with the River Liffey on one side and access to the M50 on the other. Back then, if you lived in Palmerstown, you were living out in the countryside, surrounded by green fields and few houses. Hollyville was a small estate of around 9 homes built on the old Lucan Road. These houses backed onto a wide open field that the local children used as a playground. The houses themselves were semi-detached with open attics, so you could go from one house to the other through the attic. With new fire regulations introduced in 1976, this would be no longer the case. The houses were described as completely different to those in the village at that time. They were larger, mostly with garages and fine rectangular gardens. They attracted the middle class, professional owners, businessmen, some of Ireland's top publicans, senior civil servants and even a retired Garda superintendent. Hollyville Estate was described by the author David Malone as a highly charged religious mix. Most of the men would attend Mass each day, without fail. Almost every male boy was an altar boy, and all the children attended Sunday school. But it wasn't just Catholics within this area. You had a Scientologist, a senior Irish Mormon, who would host an American soul singer on his occasional forays in Ireland. Many of the children were sent to retreats in the Dublin Mountains, organised by Marriage Encounter, a Catholic marriage renewal and premarital organisation. Please make this make sense. Why are children going here? Kenneth and Catherine Bale lived in number 7 Hollyville. Kenneth was from Dublin originally and Catherine was from Limerick. Living with them was Catherine's parents, Richard and Anne Breslin. Their first child was born in 1957, a little boy called Lorcan, and they would go on to have 4 more children. So it was a full house to say the least. Kenneth was an Irish, Spanish and Latin speaker, and they only spoke Irish within their household. Kenneth was also a conservative Catholic and a teacher at Mount Melleray Abbey in Waterford before moving back to Dublin. He left this job for reasons unknown and got a job in the Ordnance Survey office in Mountjoy House in the Phoenix Park. He was described as reserved by colleagues, and an acquaintance described him as the life and soul of the private prayer groups he attended. He was also a member of the lay Catholic organisation, the Legion of Mary, Irish language section, and a vocal critic to the newspapers of what he saw as slipping moral standards in the Ireland of the 1970s. Lorcan, their eldest, was a sickly child and spent a lot of his younger years in hospital for one ailment or another. In 1967 he got a bad burn on his foot, to which he had to go to hospital for treatment. The following year, in 1968, Lorcan is admitted to hospital again to correct an undescended testicle, noted during a physical examination at school. He spent 3 weeks in hospital where it should have been only a day or 2. In 1969 he would spend 6 months in St. Paul's ward of Kappa Hospital. It was a centre for the care of children with continuing health problems. In addition to attending primary school at the hospital, he also was involved with the Catholic Boy Scouts of Ireland. During this period he also gets his hands on the encyclopedia of the supernatural called Man, Myth and Magic. Because of this absence from school, he never really fitted into mainstream school and didn't have many friends. In 1970 he attended Colossimwera Secondary School, which was situated on Parnell Square in the city centre back then, and it was an all-Irish speaking school. Lorcan here continued to be unsettled. He was seen as different and he leaned into this idea. He wasn't sporty or academic, and so he decided to be weird. He read a lot and was interested in subjects like magic and the occult, basically anything to do with outside the norm. He was rebellious and didn't mind getting into trouble. In fact, he liked the attention. He liked to stand out. Lorcan was also known for his different belief systems and philosophies. He liked to do meditation and use incense, and he told people he was part of a satanic cult and had many books on the subject. But Lorcan took it one step further. He was known for killing rats and would submerge their bodies in lime and wear their bones as a necklace. It is said that he also killed rabbits, cats, and it was even rumoured that he once killed a dog. He also bunked off school and engaged in petty theft. According to his few friends, he was quick to anger and had a terrible temper. He was a scrawny teenager, but surprisingly strong, and was in many a fight. In 1964, a newly married couple, Terence and Anne Horgan, would move into number 6 Hollyville, right next door to the Bales. Terence worked as an accountant and he was a very successful businessman. He studied at the University College Dublin, and it was here he became a member of the lay Catholic organisation, Opus Dei. He was a conservative religious man. In August 1965, Anne would give birth to their only child, John Joseph. John was a quiet, clever little boy with blue eyes and blonde hair. Even though the area was a quite close-knit community, it wasn't without its happenings. In 1962, Father Patrick McCabe joined St. Philomena's Parish in Palmerstown. It would turn out that he would be named as an abuser of children in the Murphy Report. In July of that same year, there would be a report that 10 dogs were found poisoned in the Palmerstown area, many of them being pets. They were found strewn at distances along the main road. In April 1965, 2 teenage boys pleaded guilty to robbery of 3 prayer books and 5 religious booklets from St. Philomena's Church, saying they took them for the children. St. Philomena's Church is only a stone's throw away from Hollyville Housing Estate. In 1967, Father McCabe is moved from Palmerstown to another parish in Kildare. According to the Murphy Report, Father McCabe retained ties with several parishioners from Palmerstown who assist him in organising holidays for boys. In 1969, 2 local boys are reported missing after last been seen playing in a field just behind the estate. I could not find any more information on these boys, whether they turned up or remained missing. On the 1st of November 1972, the body of a 74-year-old man was found in a drain beside St. Philomena's Church. He had been missing since he attended Mass the previous Friday. The newspapers reported that no foul play was suspected. A month later, Lorcan would go missing for 4 days. When he returned, his father Kenneth released a statement. He went missing for a few days before Christmas, and he never gave any real explanation of why he had done it. Safe to say he was in County Meath. St. Philomena's Church was burgled once more in 1973. Father O'Keefe noted that a communion chalice and 3 consecrated wafers were taken. The cross hanging over the altar had been taken down and placed on the floor upside down. This incident was not reported to Gardaí for some obscure reason. On Thursday, the 14th of June 1973, school was out for the older children, except for those sitting their state intercert and leaving cert exams, which usually ran in the first 3 weeks in June. It was a beautiful hot summer. This was a time when summers were summers and winters were winters. Lorcan, now 16, was one of these students sitting his intercert, even being pictured in the national newspapers, marking the beginning of the exams. Lorcan looked at the exams as futile, and coming up to the exams he would pretend to be studying by just staring at his books as he sat in his bedroom. On the Thursday morning he had his geography exam, and he was dreading it, but it was his only exam that day. Meanwhile, Lorcan's mother Catherine was in hospital having a hysterectomy, and on this day her neighbour Anne Horgan decided to go visit her. She had arranged for Catherine's mother, Mrs. Breslin, to look after her son John, 7, when he got home from school. That afternoon John left his school, Sculmurra Mount Sackville Primary School, which was situated on the edge of the Phoenix Park. John walked home to the Bale house. The Bale girls were having a music lesson that afternoon, and so John spent his time with their pet canary. Mrs. Breslin brought the cage and the parrot out into the back garden, so John could sit and talk to it and get a bit of sun. Lorcan by now also had come home. He had a cup of coffee and went to his room to listen to music. While he was there, a plan started to develop in his head. He was considering getting John, as he put it. He planned how he would do it, how he would kill him and hide the body. As soon as he decided this was going to happen, he started getting things he needed to carry out the plan. He got a club and some neckties, then went down to the tool shed and got as much rope as he could find. Now prepared, he asked John if he wanted to go look for rabbits in the field that backed onto the row of houses. John, being delighted, climbed the fence and walked into the field with Lorcan. When they were far into the field, Lorcan pointed to a hole, telling John it was a burrow. John bent down to look in, and it was then Lorcan struck poor John over the head with the club. It is said John died instantly, but Lorcan was not sure if he was dead, so he tied little John up and gagged him. He then bundled him into a sack he had with him. He dragged poor John nearer to his house and hid the body in some bushes. 2 young boys saw him, and he scared the 2 boys away by shouting at them and flipping them off. Lorcan then went back to his house to get a rucksack. By now it was around 4:30 p.m. When he returned to where John was hidden, Lorcan bundled him into the rucksack and carried him towards his house. By now his family were in the house having dinner. He left the rucksack in the garage and went up to his bedroom, climbed into the wardrobe and up into the attic. You see, in this room was a fitted wardrobe that went right to the ceiling. In this wardrobe, Lorcan had cut a hole in the ceiling to the attic. This turned out to be his little hideaway that nobody knew about. He had a raised platform set up, the stolen chalice and wafers from St. Philomena's church, saucers with some type of white powder, and a plastic box with human feces in it. Here he lit some candles, went back downstairs and retrieved the bag with John's body in it. Leaving the body in his room, he again went back downstairs for a ladder so he could access the attic carrying the body. It was a tight fit trying to get John's body through the small hole in the ceiling to the attic. Later, a post-mortem examination would show bruising on John's shoulders and shins, caused by him being pulled and shoved through the hole. Lorcan took John from the bag and laid him out on the joists of the roof. He checked for a pulse and found none, and so loosened the ropes. He wrapped another rope around him and hoisted him up onto a horizontal beam and tied his arms, outstretched in a crew form position. Then Lorcan blew out all but 2 candles, went downstairs and had a cup of tea. At some point he returned to the attic and cut off all John's clothes with the scissors. At 6 p.m, as Lorcan stood in the kitchen, his grandmother, Mrs. Breslin, came in from the back garden and asked where John was. Lorcan said he must be still out in the field. Mrs. Breslin felt something was not right and began to worry, calling to all the neighbours asking if anyone had seen John. By now the whole street were keeping a lookout for him. When John's father, Terence, gets home at 8 p.m, he is allegedly told by Lorcan that he had gone to the field to study and that John went with him and wandered off. At 9 p.m, Terence reported John missing. The Gardaí arrived and the search for John intensified. The detectives on scene were told that Lorcan was the last person to see John as far as they knew. One of the detectives spoke with Lorcan and he told him the same story as he had told John's father, Terence. But he did add that he saw John heading to the gate that led out onto the main road. But the detective worked out that from where Lorcan said he was standing, there was no way he could have seen John. When the same detective spoke with Lorcan's father, he described him as different lately. He was more combative, sullen, hostile to his siblings, and acting out by asking about his father's deeply held religious beliefs. The detective decided to confront Lorcan and ask, had he anything to do with John's disappearance? They said that John may have had an accident, that he might be hurt and needed help, that they needed to know if he knew anything. By now Lorcan was acting shifty and pulling at his clothes and looking towards the upstairs in an uneasy manner, and so the Gardaí felt they needed to search the Bale home. They went to search Lorcan's room, but it was locked and a key had to be asked for. When they looked in his wardrobe, they found it was empty of clothes, and pieces of plasterboard were on the floor. When the Garda looked up, he saw the hole in the ceiling. When they asked Lorcan about it, he said he had made the hole. The Gardaí entered the attic through the trapdoor on the landing, and it was then they saw the body of poor little John, naked and suspended from the rafters, and a homemade altar behind him. I can only imagine how this affected the Garda that found him. I'm sure it was a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. When the Horgans were told that John had been found dead, the response from his mother was as follows. This boy was a gift from God, and the Lord had intended them to have him for 7 years only. There was no aggression or talk of revenge, as one would naturally expect under the circumstances. I'm not sure if some of you are aware, but the number 7 is very important in the Bible and religions. Number 7 is a symbol of completion, wisdom, and spiritual or intellectual exploration. 7 days of creation in the Bible, 7 heavens in Judaism and Islam, even down to the lucky number 7. Immediately the search was called off and locals were told to go home, not knowing that John had been found, and so they refused to do so. But soon word reached them that not only John had been found, but that he was found dead in the Bales' attic. Many suspected straight away that Lorcan had something to do with it. When forensics examined the scene, they noted that John had been carefully placed into position. His wrists were tied firmly to a beam that ran the length of the attic. His feet rested on a chair with a cushion below him, with a red rope tied around his waist and fastened to the beam, along with another piece of rope around his chin, also fastened to the beam, through a nail to keep his chin up. Lorcan was brought to the local Garda station in a Garda car, accompanied by his father Kenneth, at around 11:30 p.m. that Thursday night. He was cautioned before he told Gardaí what happened that day. He relayed the events in a calm and detached manner, eventually confessing to the murder of John. When forensics were going through the attic and collecting evidence, they found a bowl full of sand, several candles arranged into a pentagram form, a broken bell, 2 tarot cards, the devil and the lovers, a cloak made from blankets, and a red silk vest. There was also an alarm clock stopped at 5 p.m. Now many have asked what the symbolism of the clock set to 5 p.m, and so I had a Google moment. It is the start of a new day, the passage of time, or even a pivotal moment in your life. In a spiritual context, both 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. can be seen as significant times for reflection or connection, representing the importance of being mindful and present. It can also represent a deadline or a moment that requires a transition, forcing action or change. If you look at the 24-hour clock and the number 17, which is 5 p.m, 1 represents victory and 7 represents perfection. So take what you will from this. The communion chalice and the 3 wafers, which had been stolen from the local church by Lorcan, was not bagged and taken in as evidence. To set the scene of Catholic Ireland back then, they did not want to touch what they would have considered the body of Christ. So they called upon the priest that was sitting next door with the Horgan family, Father Mulcahy, who was the head of Opus Dei at that time and was a close family friend of John's parents. He was the one who also identified John's body. It wouldn't be until 4 a.m. that John's body was removed from the Bales family home and taken to Kerwin's funeral home. The following day the Gardaí returned to the Bale home, along with Lorcan, and they walked through the events of the day before. He was then brought back to Lucan Garda station and then brought to a special sitting in the district court and formally charged with John's murder. He was remanded in custody at St. Patrick's Institute for Young Offenders, right next to Mountjoy Prison. It was reported in the newspapers that John had been found dead in a neighbour's attic and insinuated that it had been an accident, while a newspaper in Montreal in Canada seemed to have more of a grasp on what happened to little John and did not shy away from the details of the gruesome murder. On the 16th of June, John's death notice appeared in the newspaper reading June 14th, 1973, following an accident in brackets. John Darling, only child of Anne and Terry, 6 Hollyville, Palmerstown, County Dublin. Mass of the Holy Angels in St. Philomena's Church, Palmerstown, today Saturday at 11 o'clock. Funeral immediately afterwards at Balgriffin Cemetery. ending with omnia bonum, which is Latin for all things work together for good. On this day, John's funeral was held. Nearly all the community turned out for it, including all the people who lived on Hollyville Estate. When it came to the sign of peace, John's father Terence crossed the aisle and embraced Lorcan's father Kenneth. Prior to this, Kenneth was invited to the Horgan house to attend prayers. Also in June, a young boy was walking through the same field that John had been murdered in when he found a canvas bag in a rat hole containing torn pages from occult magazines, curious artefacts and a small notebook. 10 names of local children, including John's name, are written in the notebook. In July 1973, the coroner adjourns the inquest into John's death after being told that a young man had been charged with his murder. This was reported in the Irish Independent, but no details were given of how John had died. Between June and November 1973, Lorcan was examined by a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and it was determined that he was of sound mind and fit for trial. On the 27th of November, Lorcan pleaded guilty to John's murder at the Four Courts in Dublin, presided over by Judge John Kenny. Because of the guilty plea, no details of the crime were given. Lorcan was sentenced to penal servitude for life, to be detained in St. Patrick's Institution until 21, and then transferred to an adult prison. While in prison, Lorcan was allowed out one Sunday every 2 weeks or so to have a meal with his family at the Skylon Hotel in Dublin, accompanied by prison officers. During this time, his father Kenneth began writing letters to the newspapers, concerned at falling moral standards in Ireland. In 1978, Lorcan is transferred to Arbor Hill Prison and then to an open prison. Did he do life? No, he did not. He was released at the end of 1980 after being deemed by the Minister for Justice as served his life sentence. He only served just over 7 years, the same amount of years John got to live. He was then shipped off to England and never seen or heard from again. No surprise there then. But in 2012, the Sunday World published a story identifying Lorcan Bale as working at that time as an environmental service manager for a London borough and associated with church groups in London. He is also married. When he came out of prison, he was released on licence, meaning he had to report to a Garda station once a year to show he was staying out of trouble. I'm sure he got this transferred to a police station in England. Our justice system loves to accommodate perpetrators. After all, he was also allowed to leave Ireland. I just want to go back to the Father McCabe non-case and the Murphy report that investigated the child abuse cases concerning the Catholic Church mainly. In the summer of 1986, McCabe, now facing numerous allegations, moved into a house in Palmerstown owned by Chief Superintendent Joe McGovern. While living in this house, he commits an assault on a 9-year-old boy. When I say assault, I don't think I have to spell out what I mean. The boy's mother reported this assault to the local Gardaí, who called McCabe in for questioning. A retired Garda sergeant accompanied McCabe and asserted his innocence. Subsequently, McCabe visits his friend, the Chief Super, and all but admits his guilt. Rather than the chief go and report these admissions to the investigating Garda, he goes to his local parish priest. When the super was asked by the Murphy Commission why he did this, he said, "I didn't consider it appropriate to notify the local Gardaí in case they would think I was meddling. I took the course that I thought was the proper course at the time. I contacted the local curate, who was a very conscientious person, and I knew he would take it on board, and he did. He contacted the Archbishop's house about the matter, which led to them contacting the superintendent in Ballyfermot in Dublin. But you see, he was wrong because after this disclosure, the investigation stopped, and no further inquiries were made by the Gardaí. Even when they knew that McCabe intended to return to the US, no warrant for his arrest was sought. When the Commission questioned the investigating Garda, he told them that he did not want to expose the young boy within the community as having been indecently assaulted by a priest. The Commission did not take kindly to this explanation. In October 1989, Kenneth Bale, Lorcan's father, died of a heart attack. When David Malone began his research into the case for his book, He discovered that no death certificate had been issued for John until 2011, when an inquest into his death, adjourned on numerous occasions, was reopened. Statements were read out on the circumstances of John's death and the condition he was found in. The report from the pathologist stated that John had died from a fracture to the skull and bruising and laceration of the brain as a result of severe blunt force injury or injuries to the back of the head. He also noted multiple bruises on the back of both John's shoulders and multiple small bruises on the fronts of both of his shins. The inquest was again adjourned indefinitely by coroner Kieran Geraghty, who stated that he did not feel it appropriate to call further evidence against the wishes of John's parents. It must be noted as well that much of the evidence of Lorcan's interest in Satanism is based on the testimony of Lorcan Conroy, a school friend of Lorcan Bale. He told Gardaí that Lorcan had changed in the 6 months before John's murder, that Lorcan had told him he had joined a secret society of adults who met weekly to perform certain rituals, including nudity. The pair also took part in a séance and had the use of a Ouija board in the attic of Lorcan's home. He also said that on the day John was murdered, Lorcan told him that he was going to kill the boy next door to guarantee good results in his exams. This murder of poor little John was not the only sinister thing to happen, and it's hard to get away from what might have been going on around Lorcan and what he was involved in. He would have been an altar boy at the same time McCabe was assigned to St. Philomena's Church, and would have most likely gone on the holidays that were arranged for the boys in the Dublin mountains. It's hard not to look at both sets of parents, the Bales and the Horgans, and their involvement in these sidelines away from the mainstream Catholic Church. What exactly went on at these prayer meetings? I know we all deal with death in a different way, and I think because both families were deeply religious, they found comfort through their faith. But it is hard to get away from how this case was handled and feel that there was a cover-up, and how the authorities wanted to bury this case and erase it from Irish history. These times are presented as a much simpler time, where church and state mixed. People believed what they were told and you didn't ask questions. We as an Irish society were kept ignorant as to what went on, and we were compliant, and our unwillingness to take our heads out of the sand enabled those horrors to go on. I don't think Lorcan was born a killer. I think he was turned into one. Rest in peace, John.